Welcome to the Statesman podcast, where we smoke cigars and have a conversation. I'm your host, Tommy Allen. I'm the CEO of Statesman Cigar Co. And with me is my co-host, Joel Murphy, the CFO of Statesman. And our guest today is none other than Michael Parra.
Hello. Hey, everyone.
Michael is the owner of Octo 13, a seven-figure full-service digital marketing agency, and he is also an investor in a variety of small businesses. We are super pumped to have you on the show, Parra. Before we jump in, why don't we go around the horn and talk about what we're smoking? Joel, kick us off.
Well, we're all smoking the same thing. We're
Yes,
testing
sir.
out a new blend that we have of our Connecticut, the Statesman, by Statesman Cigar Co. We recently got these, about a month ago? Our new roller.
They're fresh.
It's very lovely.
Awesome. And we are letting Parra blind taste test this for the first time, so we'll see.
So far, pretty good.
He's a big Rocky Patel fan.
I am.
Which we are also fans of Rocky Patel. Makes great cigars. So, Parra, talk us through, how did Octo 13 come to fruition? Did you think that you would be an owner of a digital marketing agency? Talk us through all that.
Yeah, I would definitely say that being in the marketing space wasn't something I was considering as a profession. I was doing marketing from the corporate level, but never as a business owner. I've kind of leaned more towards starting businesses that either sold a product or different things like that, as opposed to offering a service. So I was definitely more in the e-commerce space. So falling into marketing definitely was a little bit change of pace, but yeah, I'm loving it now and been doing it for quite some time now. So definitely love it.
What was the biggest challenge, I would say? What is the biggest challenge of moving into a more marketing focused business from what you were previously doing?
Yeah, so I guess coming from e-commerce and us working with e-commerce business now, those things definitely do align in terms of we are trying to solve problems for clients that maybe have issue with creative or developing what does that website or landing page look like, understanding the analytics. So a lot of those things do overlap, of course, being in from that space and selling products ourselves. But I guess the biggest challenge definitely is coming from a scalability standpoint. When you sell products, you have that flexibility of scaling. You could sell, 5 products a week and then easily switch to 5 products a day. But when it comes to the service-based industry, like an agency, you can't go from servicing 5 clients to then 50 clients. It doesn't work like that. So that's definitely a challenge in terms of understanding what are those economics of scale, how can we do those things that support these businesses, but with also balancing the team and how much workload they are able to handle at any given time. So that's definitely the challenge there.
I feel like maybe there's a bit of a similarity to being in the hospitality industry of the issue of scaling. That it's not something that you can just take from 5 to 50 restaurants quickly, because there's so much that goes into it. Do you think that there's a parallel there of there's a lot that would go into scaling?
A little bit. I mean, I think for what I was actually going to ask you was,
Go for it.
do you find, because your team, they work remote, right? So do you find that there is challenges when it comes to like company culture or things like that? Because I know for us, like, scaling's hard because you have to kind of, take one model and then, not reinvent, but you have to implement that somewhere else with brand new people and keeping that same expectation as far as execution, teamwork, how we treat our customers, all those things is a very much like cultural thing of our business. But I wonder how that works when you have people that work remote. Do you still find that, company culture to be a challenge or establishing that?
Yeah, there's definitely a challenge when it comes to company culture being the entire team remote. There's good things and bad things of that. The challenging part is you're not physically there with the person, so you can't read body language and different things like that. Connection's a little bit different when you do a Zoom call. But the benefit of remote is we do go a little bit deeper from like a talking standpoint. So usually when we meet with the team, we meet on Mondays. when we talk about our personal lives. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, one of the guys got a new apartment.
That's really cool.
His girlfriend just moved in. It's like his life is changing.
Yeah.
I talked about my kid, and he was like, "Oh, congrats! Like it's a big step." Talk about my anniversary trip that we did and different things like that, where that might not happen too much sometimes in a actual physical place because you see each other so often, and then you kind of just follow each other on social media, so you're like, "Oh, I kind of already see it."
Sure.
But with remote people, you kind of don't really like engage that much on social media because the connection isn't like the same as physical.
Right.
So yeah, we actually talk a lot more, and in a weird way, I almost feel more connected with the person having these Zoom calls because communication, I feel like, is everything. So having that communication with them really, like, I get to see how he thinks, how she thinks, how she processes information, how he processes information, and yeah, it's very it's interesting. Yeah, I would say.
I'm curious, kind of in line with the culture question. How do you? Does Octo 13? Is it down to a point of like formula? I guess I would say where it's like you have your thing down and people are coming to you for that one thing, or is it you're very much I tailor to what each person needs?
Yeah, I would say we definitely tailor to what people need, but formulas do exist for sure within the organization, especially around systems. So if we're trying to run advertising for a client, that's going to look a particular way in terms of how we onboard them, how we understand their business. We have templates to essentially break down their MVP, their value props, and different things like that. That in turns allows us to do analysis on their essentially market segment. What does that funnel look like, and different things like that. So there's systems in place for that, but it's definitely tailored to each specific need because for some clients they have different objectives, and I kind of like to sum it up in this. It's like some businesses are looking for profitability and some businesses are looking for growth, and I always ask them, what does success look like for you guys? Because success means something different for every individual business owner and company. Some have a cash flow issue, so then profitability is a big concern. So we go into the numbers and look at what is it cost to acquire a customer.
Sure.
Is there an LTV model to build revenue on top of the customers coming in? If it's growth, it's completely different, honestly, because they could be funded. It could be about capitalizing on a market share and growing as quickly as possible. So those visions for a business are completely different. Where if you're trying to get your second round of funding, if you don't have growth but you have profitability, you might not get funding because they're looking for the unicorn of growth. Like, oh, we just doubled our number of customers year over year, and they're like, oh shoot, this is a business that is growing exponentially. So it's definitely aligning on what is that North Star for each company and what does success look like.
Have you found that there's not one is better than the other, but have you found within your specific context between those two, is there an easier path in terms of like where you can maximize value in terms of if they're going growth or profitability, which one you prefer to work on?
It's a good question. I'm not sure if there's one particular one I prefer over the other. Um, I guess I could say the good and bad of both. The good of growth is it's more like rapid testing. It's more really figuring out the messaging, and like it's like very bigger picture, trying to grow as quickly as possible. Where profitability can be a lot leaner in the sense of if you're trying to grow, you might do a full-on video shoot, photo shoot, because you need the brand to look and be presented a certain way, and you don't mind spending the money to have that execution come out. If you're more on profitability, spending 10, 15K on a shoot may not make sense.
Right. It's like, that's the thing we don't want to do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do we spend as little as possible?
kind of feel like growth is more fun, especially from a marketing standpoint, is because you get to get into analytics. There's less pressure. You're more
creative.
looking for like ways to be visible as opposed to how do you, you know, squeeze the most out of this limit and make sure that you get them.
It can also be scary though too, because we'll work with companies that are funded, and they're like brand new ads account, and they're like, we want to spend 50, 100K a month.
You're like, we got to.
And
warm
I was
up.
like, oh, I was like Facebook doesn't even know who you are. Like, I have to reach out to like an account rep and get approval, because usually there's limits on how much you could just spend. We can't just spend 100K because they charge a credit card.
Yeah.
So a lot of times they're like, okay, you have to wire us like 50K,
okay,
put it into account, and then we'll do it that way for the first month. Then you could charge your credit card. But yeah, there's different rules around that. So it's definitely funner, I would say, probably for that. But for me, I guess what I find enjoyment in is like solving problems. It's kind of like a puzzle. I don't like puzzles, but I like solving problems.
Yeah.
And I'm like the worst.
Puzzles are
like,
terrible.
At least for my wife, I guess when she tries to tell me a story, I'm immediately go into solve mode. I was like, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And then she's like, I just want you to listen. Why are you trying to solve it?
Like,
and I was
that
like, oh, my
doesn't
bad.
seem right.
Listening seems pointless.
Well, I want to sit on the solving problems, because I feel like that fundamentally is a cornerstone of business growth. Like, it's how you have reached the level that you've reached and how you're going to continue to grow. Speak a little bit about, like, are you naturally someone who has found problem solving in a business context easy, or was it something that like I really had to get my head around and it took a lot of failing? Like, talk through problem solving in a business context.
Yeah, I guess in my professional career, I kind of started off as an analyst. So I was kind of like a numbers person to begin with. Not the best though, and I kind of realized that when I left college and I like started working in a professional scenario. You know, like, it's funny when you realize like, oh, I'm like kind of smart. Like, I did well in school, and then you get in professional setting, like, oh shoot, there's people like way smarter than me. Like, they're using the math problems that I was like, I'm never gonna use this, and they're actually using it. And you're like, damn, that's wild. Like, do you remember this in college? It's like, I do, but like not really.
Like, I was there.
Yeah, like the rules were all set up. It's like the train is going this fast, and if it's but this is like real life.
Yeah.
So I think me being a student of the game kind of has helped me to realize that it's not about me having the answer to their problem, whatever that may be, but it's me finding out how can we solve this.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing.
Great differentiation.
And I think that's what people, I think, could get confused by. They think they need to have the answer to these clients. And this is why most people are often afraid to enter into a business venture or start something. Is like, I don't know if I have the answer. And it's actually not about having the answer, but it's about doing the work to find out how to solve this problem. Yeah. And I think that's what I'm extremely comfortable doing, is like stepping into that unknown where, like, even today, like a client would be like, oh, we want to do this and that on the website and change this and change that. Is that possible? And I was like, we'll find out. I'll let you know tomorrow. I'll dig into it, and then I'll let you know. I'll go over it with the team, and we'll figure it out. And if not, maybe we could find an app and go from there. So it's where other people's like, they feel like they have to know every little nuance of a problem to solve it. It's not necessarily the case.
I think most people too generally don't have that, whatever it is, gene, whatever you want to call it, that makes them want to go, oh, I'll figure it out. Or be secure enough to know, well, I don't know it, but I'm sure I can either figure out a way.
Yeah.
And I think most people either, like you said, want to have the answer to the problem, or feel like if I don't have the answer, then I'm not qualified or I can't do a particular job. It's very few people that like toe the middle of like, I do have an answer in this situation, or in this situation I don't, but I know how to get it. I think that's what, you know, makes you great at your job, and like also like that kind of entrepreneur gene that you have thinks that way. It's like, okay, here's 10 different problems. Do I know the answer to everything? No, but I can find a solution or figure something out along the way.
Yeah, I agree with that. Are you risk averse? Because I feel like probably not if you're that personality that's like, I don't mind stepping in front of someone and saying, I don't know, but I can figure it out.
Yeah, I would say in a weird way, I am kind of risk averse. But I think for me, I need validation. And that's why I would say I'm somewhat risk averse. So most people, when it comes to like, let's say solving a problem, or like I'm selling a product, it costs me $100, or let's say it costs me $25 to sell for $100, so I have that $75 margin. I think a lot of people, when they see those things, they're like, okay, I have $75 of profit I could potentially to sell this product. So if you sell it for less, it's good. If you sell it for more, it's bad. Product sells for $80 in acquisition costs, you lose $5 a sale. For me, it's having validation and understanding that today's success doesn't mean tomorrow's success, and today's failure doesn't mean tomorrow's failure. So that's why me coming from an analytical analyst background, I actually understand that. So I think out the gate, sometimes if the numbers don't make sense, because people think of it like I buy a car, I buy a house, the numbers make sense, it's good.
Right.
But when it comes to marketing or any types of sales, it doesn't mean that. Like you could lose in the beginning, in the first month, 2, 3 months, 6 months, but then you figure it out after 6 months. And coming from that analytical analyst background, I was taught that from my colleagues. I was taught that from our CTO. I was taught that from our CFO, where we go over numbers. If we're going to buy this company and acquire it, we'll have an ROI on that in 6 months, a year, 2 years. And they're okay with those types of terms. And I think sometimes when you're coming from a place where maybe you're not taught that, it's hard for people to grasp that. They think profitability immediately, first sale. They run ads and it's like, oh my God, it was $50 to acquire. I'm selling a $10 product. Turn them off. And it's like, but why don't you just set a budget first?
Right.
What are you willing to spend a month over the course of 6 months? Could you do $500? Okay, start there. Once you get accustomed to that, you start learning the numbers. You're like, okay, it started off at $100 to convert someone. Now it's 75 the next month. The next month is 50. Oh shoot, we're almost profitable.
Yeah.
We're doing it.
Yeah. So it's just part of that journey. So I don't think it's like necessarily a gene, or it could be, but I think it's just having that patience and just that understanding that the numbers will eventually make sense if you're willing to put some parameters on it. And that's all you got to do. What am I willing to spend in a given period? And does that work for my budget? If so, it's actually comfortable, because if you're like, if I lose 50K, if you have that mental note, cool. And then if you beat it, it's almost like a success.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
So, yeah.
How do you find that how do you find it, so it seems it's like you find it easy to convince clients to spend their money. So like,
ooh, I like where this is going. This is going to be a good question.
you know what I mean?
It.
Because I feel like it's almost like a stockbroker. It's like, yeah, invest 50K into Tesla, and then it should produce this kind of like ROI over this amount of time. But obviously, convincing someone to invest their own money in their product, obviously they're coming to you, so it's a little different. But you're the one that knows, okay, well, if you're going to spend $100 a week, that's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
Or this is how much you actually need to put into, or this is where you should put your money to get the biggest return on investment. Do you find it challenging getting people to buy into giving you whatever you think is worth it for a budget?
Not necessarily, because there's usually qualifications that go into, like, let's say working with us, where I would probably defer people away most of the time. So like, we'll have people reach out like, oh, we want to work with you. We've saved $50,000. We sell this product. This, and I was like, okay, what do you mean save? Like, is this your life savings? Like, yeah, basically. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, you know.
Like, I don't want to be responsible for eating up your life
Yeah.
savings.
So it's like life savings. Like, you have kids and stuff. Like, what's going on here?
Oh my God.
But no, I almost try to like turn people down in that sense. And it's not like it's a marketing trick or tactic, which you could do it that way. But it's mainly, we want to work with people who are, we have like kind of like stages in terms of like when it makes sense. So like, if you almost do it like a funnel, so most funnels It's like this V, and you have top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, and bottom of the funnel. Bottom of the funnel are going to be people who are like in market, ready to be activated with you guys. And there's people who are middle of the funnel who are maybe shopping around for different agencies to work with. And top of the funnel are people who are a little too early to probably work with the agency, because agency costs money. So if you're looking at money out the gate, you're paying for somebody, and they're going to ask you to spend more in advertising and marketing and email, whatever that may be. And that could be a big investment to spend an extra 5-10K a month if you're not making that kind of money. So it's mainly a qualifying the right people, and even telling the ones that aren't ready yet is that once you get to X amount of dollars per month, then we could revisit and have a conversation. But you definitely want to work with people who are either qualified or at least have the funds available, because we work with pre-revenue companies before, where they essentially have zero revenue, but they're funded. So it's different. They have a full backing, a whole creative team. They have shoots already lined up. It's a little bit different of a model, but you want to qualify somebody to make sure, because one, you don't want to waste their time, and you don't want to waste your time, and you don't want to waste your team's time. And that's the most valuable asset, is your time. And if they're not ready mentally, then they're just not ready to work with you. And I think the biggest qualifier we have is if you're not advertising already, you can't work with us. It's just as simple, because it's not about convincing you to advertise. It's convincing you to work with us to advertise and market your brand. If we have to convince you twice, you're not the right fit. Yeah. It's just picking us. So it's that pre-qualifier.
Back to the risk averse part. I'm curious. I want to jump into the investment side of things. You're invested in a few small businesses. I want to talk through one, how you got into that, and two, how do you approach, now that you've been in it for a little bit, how do you approach that process? Like, what's a good fit? What's not a good fit for people out there that are, thinking of getting into something like that? Because I feel like there's a new trend of, real estate will always be, at a certain level, will always be a good investment. But then I feel like there's a new trend of understanding that you can buy small businesses, and those oftentimes can be more profitable than real estate, for if you don't have millions of dollars to actually make it, turn. So talk through your approach to getting into small business investing.
Yeah, I think it's probably easier, in my opinion, to do investing in businesses than it is real estate. I'm not really a real estate person, I guess, to begin with.
Sure.
Like, do I own my home? Yes. And my family owns properties and stuff like that. But I guess when it comes down to the numbers, it's mainly a cash flow issue that I think people are actively looking for. If you're looking for a passive way without having the initial active income, I think that's a misstep, because active income kind of gives you the freedom to explore passive avenues. So it's like having that active income. And maybe in today's age, I kind of feel that's around 10 to 20K, maybe 20K. Once you hit like 20K a month in active income, then you could explore other avenues. But before then, you kind of have to really get that active income up. And the reason why, like, maybe either working with somebody to start a business, buying a small little business is the best, is because if you have a small business, let's say you make 5K a month as overall revenue, and then after profitability, maybe you take home half of that, or even 30% of that. Making $2,500 a month in a small business is pretty feasible in terms of profit, but we would be extremely hard from one rental property.
You have to buy like 400.
Yeah. Think of how much money, like, you might make $200 a month off a rental property, but not $2,500. Like, that's a lot. You have to buy an apartment complex, and that's multiple units probably.
Right.
And that's way more risk. You think of it, you could buy a laundromat for 200, 300K. You could buy a little e-commerce website that sells t-shirts for 50K. It's making 2 or 3K in profit a month. That's way more feasible than trying to buy a $500,000 apartment complex in the hood or in another state and hoping to make a couple $100.
Yeah.
It's just, and the risk is just too high.
Do you have did you arrive at that just by kind of studying it a bit, or did you have friends that have either done both and were like, hey, starting out, it's a better move to do the small business thing and grow into where you can actually start acquiring real estate because, like you said, you have the necessary income to actually acquire enough to make proper profit?
Yeah, like my parents own property, so they have rental properties. I have a lot of friends in the space that have rental properties. So seeing them and getting feedback from them is good, but I would consider that anecdotal data. So for me, I like to look at the numbers. So I actually follow a lot of these social media gurus who essentially sell
100%.
like real estate courses and whatnot.
This is your chance.
Yeah. And like passive income, and they show like their Ferrari and whatever. But most of these people are in their 50s and 60s. They've been doing it for a while, and they do explain it's a long-term play.
Right.
So I appreciate that transparency, and they do kind of break down the numbers. They do a lot of things like they talk about BRRRR and cash out refi and different things like that. And I think there is a lot of things you can do in that sense. But for me, I like the joy of like bringing value to a market, and whether it's introducing a product or a service, like even if it's small as like if you do a lawn care business, like a house that has a nice lawn, it looks nice,
Yeah.
like where like the connotations of a landlord, usually the best, right?
Yeah.
Like what are you? And that's why people maybe lean towards Airbnb, because there's like, it's cool, you get to provide an experience. But landlord, I don't know if anyone's ever dealt with people before, but yeah, people aren't the best. And I've lived in apartment complexes, and a couple of my neighbors have been crazies. So I could only imagine what that's like.
And like, have hundreds of those. Like,
yeah, just having a bunch of them. And I think living in an apartment complex, I remember seeing the how it is a kind of a rich man's game, because I moved into this apartment complex that was super nice, and the security deposit was $250. Super nice apartment complex. Every apartment's $4,000 ish and up, and the fact that the security deposit was $250, one implies this company must be crazy rich, because if you rent from a small mom and pop apartment that's 4 units, they want first and last months, right? So you're like $8,000 out the door, and you're like, do I trust this landlord with this? But these big corporations, it's not even about, they're like qualifying the person moving in beforehand, right? Where the landlord essentially is almost at the mercy of the market. He has to take whoever, and he secures himself by taking first and last months. Then they passed a law recently, you can only take the first month now. So you're like, oh shoot. And obviously it's California, so it's different, but like, that's crazy. It's going to be to a point where
probably can't take anything.
Yeah, maybe it'd be like $100, So it's like, that's a big risk from my analytical standpoint, where it's just like, I'm not at that place to take that risk quite yet.
I'm curious, what is in your current portfolio of businesses that you're invested in?
So we do a little bit of like, we have a cleaning business, so it does house cleaning, different things like that. We did a few other ones that we like shut down. We did some sports training, athletics training, different things like that. We did like gift boxes for people. We did journals, like mental health journals, different things like that. Those were cool ventures, and you kind of learn a lot. And I think that's what people have to come to realize when it comes to even investing into a business or exploring those things, is the benefit of real estate is the benefit of like, it's a physical asset. And if you could somehow weather the storm of maybe people not paying rent and the roof needing to be replaced and so forth, it's a good long-term investment. The downside is the immediate cash flow. The risk part of small business is you may not be able to sell. There may be a bunch of costs associated with that you weren't accounting for, and it just may not work out in terms of the growth of that potential market. So I think those are things that we've come to learn. But what's interesting about investing in these businesses, even though we may lose certain money on certain ventures, a lot of times we almost like break even. So it's kind of like a wash, which is pretty nice. Or we may lose only a few $1,000.
Sure.
Which, trying a product out for a year and losing $4K or $3K, and then especially if you split that amongst partners, it's almost inconsequential. In that sense. You're like, all right, like it wasn't that big of a deal. You made revenue, maybe you made 50K, 100K overall, but then it all got burnt up by marketing, advertising, whatnot.
Yeah.
So I think those things helps me balance that, where other ventures I think could be a little bit more challenging.
I think also the like experience that you learn along the way, it totally makes it worth it.
That's
like
good.
Experience is the best teacher. Did you ever have like a mentor or someone that, maybe not a direct mentor? Like I know for me, there's like different stages in my life where there's people I kind of like looked up to and like, you know,
Totally.
spoke into my life, whether that's like leadership advice or business advice or whatever. And like I never was like, hey, can you be my mentor? And like, you know, but it was one of those like, okay, I always like gleaned from them. Were there people like that for you, or you just kind of like observe people from afar? And
Oh, 100%. I think people were my mentors. They didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
Like in my mind, like you're my mentor. In his mind, he's like, I'm just talking to you.
Yeah.
You're like, no, you're not.
Yeah, when I was a little kid, there was this guy in my church, and he owned a painting company. And I used to love just to ask him questions, because when I was a kid, I started a silk screening business. And so I was silk screening T-shirts and stuff like that. So I was telling him about my business, and I was in high school at the time, and I was about to go into college. And so he would take me to lunch and stuff like that, and we would hang out. And he was in his like 40s or 50s at that time. And yeah, he was just great in terms of like picking his brain. And it was he really changed the way I thought for such a young person at that time, where like my parents owned a home and another property. And my dad used to tell me like, oh, when we pass away, you could have all of this. And he's like, and I told him, he's like, oh, what's your plans for the future? It's like, well, I could take over my dad's properties.
I'm going to be a mogul.
Yeah. And he was like, your dad had you at 24 years old. I was like, your dad's going to be around for a long time. Like, and I was like, oh, shoot. I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, he goes,
thanks, Dad.
When your dad passes away, you might be 50 or 60 years old. And he's like, do you want to wait till then? Or would you want to build something that's your own, that you built yourself,
really
that no one can take from you, that you know how to do because you built it from zero to whatever it is. And when he told me that, from that day forward, I was like, I don't even want anything from my parents. I don't want their property.
Yeah.
They could give it away to anybody. It doesn't matter. Because like whatever I'm going to build moving forward, it's going to be something that I build, not something that's given to me.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, you're right. And that changed the way I thought forever. And yeah, never the same since then.
Leave it to the painters.
Yeah.
That's great. I love
advice.
that, especially because that could, I think most people in the situation would be like, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, you're going to get some houses. But for him to be able to speak to the fact that, hey, think about this.
Yeah.
Which is something I want to hone in on, the mental side of business. With your team at Octo 13, is it important to you to develop how they think, not just what they do, or to you is it like, that's my responsibility as CEO, and not that it literally does not matter how they think, but I'm fine if it's more about what they do. Where do you fall in that?
No, it definitely matters how they think, 100%. Like, I spend a lot of time, we use Loom, one of the apps.
Yep.
So if we can't get a communication off in a call, I'll make Looms and it kind of explain my thoughts. But, you know, sometimes Looms can get out of hand. Like sometimes the people on the team, I'm like following their thought process, and he made me a 32-minute loom.
Oh my God.
And
Like
I'm like
5 minutes, guys. It's supposed to be 5 minutes.
So I have it.
Sorry, tell everybody, keep it short version, please.
Yeah, I have it on like 1.5 speed. And I was like, this is still, you're taking way too long. So that's important because, like, working with people who are remote, it's really trying to understand how they think and their processes. And it's important for them to understand how I think, because there's cultural differences. There's just differences in terms of how we interpret things. And they may see certain things that I don't see, and I see things that they don't see. So collaboration is probably one of the greatest gifts that mankind has. You could almost accomplish anything through collaboration. And one mind, no matter how brilliant you are, you need people to figure out how to solve a problem. And it's so critical for them to understand, this is how Michael speaks, and this is how Michael communicates, and this is how she speaks and how she communicates. Because when you have that understanding, one, you don't get offended if Michael gets all excited about something and he's like, no, 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 or yes, 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 and vice versa. Like, if that person is typically a little bit shorter in terms of how they communicate, I understand that because I spent time communicating with them and troubleshooting. And honestly, when it comes to solving problems, especially in the marketing space, we're starting to realize with the advancements of AI and different things like that, the easy part is becoming the work. Meaning AI is taking over things that once was hard. And now it's more about the strategy that's more important than the actual work, which is almost different than a lot of other industries. So, like, if you're getting your roof done, the architect is cheaper than the construction team to actually do the roof. It's just, maybe that wasn't the case back in the days, in the 50s and stuff. It was the architect that made all the money. Now it's the construction crew and the materials that is the biggest cost. But in the digital space, it's the opposite. All these software tools are becoming cheaper and cheaper. They're $50 a month, $100 a month, and it does so much now than before. We used to have to buy Adobe. It was like $1,000 per software. Now it's like you can get each one for $20.
$20 a month. I have it.
Yeah, it's like so cheap. So it's really, we spend a lot of time on strategy, the most, where we really go in and we're like, all right, this is how we always done it. Is there a way that we could do it better? I'm going to pitch it to you, and then you tell me what you think, and then try to rebuttal in my theory. Rip it apart, try to see, and then we go back and forth. And it's so great doing that because that's essentially how you solve those problems. He's going to see it one way. I'm like, oh, yeah. Because he might be working in something a little bit more so than I am. So his views are this way, and then mine are more like thought and theory and psychology. So you just balance and mesh those things. And that's why I always tell people, don't hire or bring people on that are exactly like you just to replace you. 100%. You want to bring people that are actually good at what they do and actually are the yin and yang to your skill set.
It's really good.
That's so good. I'm curious, just to throw a little like easy question in there, in regard to reading. I'm a big reader. I learn a lot through reading. I think a lot of people learn a lot through reading. A lot of successful people do. Is there any one book, or maybe it's a couple books that you've read? It doesn't even have to be recently. Just books you've read during your time in business that have been really like, this is something that can move a person forward.
Yeah, I guess in terms of business, the book that changed me the most was probably The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. That completely changed the way I thought about business and marketing, is that I just kind of viewed everything from a very linear perspective. And most times in business, like, I'm a perfectionist by default, which is the downside. So I'll try to, like, if I'm going to launch a product or a service, I have to have it perfect, and then I put it out there. The downside, I might spend 2 weeks putting this thing together, and then I put it out there, and you get, like, for example, let's say I make a reel or something, or a TikTok. I might spend a week editing it, 3 days shooting it. I put out there, it's 100 views.
Yeah.
And then my mom is the only one commenting, right? She's like, "You're the best, sweetie." And it's like, well, not the target audience, but I appreciate
when
that.
When we first started posting Statesman stuff, my grandmother would comment.
Yeah.
She'd be like, "This is great."
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Go away.
Please go away, grandma.
You're messing up my algorithm. It's gonna show only to family members.
Okay, so Lean, start up.
Funny.
Is there things that you are reading or listening to now that you're finding helpful?
Yeah, there's a book I just finished called Wanting, and I forgot the author, but it talks about mimetic desire, and I've never heard that term or what that was even about.
I was about to ask.
And I was like, what the heck does that even mean? So essentially it talks, and as a marketer, it really fascinated me. It's a little bit difficult of a read. So it's one of those things I put down for like a week or two and then had to bring back up, because it's like I needed to distance myself from it to think about it and then come back to it, because it was so much. But essentially, to sum it up, now that I understand it, is the things you want in life, you only want because somebody else wants it. So you don't actually want most of the things that you want in life. You only want it is because somebody else wants it. The nice watch, the car, the house, the wife, the kids, whatever that may be. Certain things in life, you start to really realize, do I really want this? And I think as you get older, you start to realize what that is. But I remember thinking about the cars that I bought as I grew up. When I got my Jeep, I really loved my Jeep. Like, I loved that car. And I wanted it because I wanted it. But then when I got a BMW, I realized I didn't really want that car. I wanted other people to see me in that car.
That's big.
But I didn't want that car.
Yeah.
Then I got my Mercedes, same thing. Then I realized it was the Jeep that I always loved, not the Mercedes, not the BMW. And the reason why that's important is because when you strive for certain things that you don't actually want, when you get those things, you realize it leaves an emptiness that's still there.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about, all right, what does that look like? So I was like, in my career, I should have like a nicer car and whatnot. And then I thought about, and I was talking to my brother and other friends about it, and I was like, if I get a car that's like, let's say $1,200 a month, and what does that do for me? Like, technically.
You're like, dang it, I have to ask the real question.
And that book really changed the way I thought about that. And I was like, if you get a normal car that's $300 a month, okay, like still does what it needs to do. And if you really love and you love the car as itself, sure, cool. But then I realized I kind of like, in a weird way, people more. Like, if I could take that $1,200 and let's say I threw a party once a month for that amount and invited everyone over, paid for all the food, the drinks, the meat, like, in terms of like
that's more fulfilling.
Yeah, that would be better.
Like, that is it versus like a car. And I realized I want the people and the party. I don't want the car. And so that completely changed the way I viewed life and everything. And that book just kind of blew me away. Yeah, and every time like somebody asks me like about a book and what's changed you recently, it's Wanting, because mimetic desire is something I never heard of before, but we also use it in marketing. And the biggest way we use it in marketing is we tell people essentially in marketing tactics, this thing is in want or demand. And there's ways you can do that. You could say limited quantity available, sold out. So you create a wait list, you create people, blah, blah, blah. There must be some reason why this thing is sold out. So there's so many tactics, and it's used throughout marketing. That's why Birkin bag, you can't just buy a Birkin bag for the ladies out there. Like, you have to buy another bag first, and then you earn your way to this Birkin bag. Then when you finally get the Birkin bag, you're like, okay, I got it. Like, did you really want it?
$4,000. What did I do?
Ferrari does the same tactic.
Yeah.
Rolex does the same thing.
Yeah. That's crazy.
I am curious. Taking that, because I feel like it also plays into the whole thing of one of the secret sauces of business is actually it's what you say no to is what actually opens things up. like great competitive strategy in business is we're going to say no to all of this and focus on this one thing to maximize that. What have you had to say? Are you at the point where you're saying no more than you are saying yes in regard to Octo 13?
Oh, 100%. Like, we say no all the time. Okay. And I think as an agency, like, you hear this term full service agency. It's thrown around a lot, meaning like we'll do anything you need. Like, you need a post on your social media, we'll do it for you.
We got captions.
We got we'll do SEO, website design, email marketing, advertising, CRO. Like, we do it all and it all. But I realize that's like usually a mistake. So it's better to be specialized than it is to be like halfway decent through a bunch of different things. Not only that, is fragmenting the team like that can be difficult as well when there's too many things to focus on. For example, let's say you guys do really good at web design, make killer websites, stunning designs, and you're like, oh, we'll dabble into SEO. Cool. Yeah, you make websites, SEO, you could tweak it, change the back end stuff of it, how the copies look. Okay, cool. Starts to align. They're like, oh, but like people always ask us for social media and different things because we're designers, we're creative, we could design. So you start doing that as well. The problem you start to realize, if one hurts, it actually could affect the others. Yeah. Meaning, let's say you're not that great at social media, but you create designs for it and you help with that. But let's say that's not really working too well. Client's upset. Oh, I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like that. It's not really working. You said it was going to grow or social media. It didn't. Then they're like, well, this website you just designed, is that even good?
Starts to have a bleep effect.
Right? So that's where you start seeing that effect. So us being hyper-focused, meaning if we just do advertising, well, so for us, we do advertising, email marketing, and website. But we only do website designs if you do advertising with us. We won't typically do website design, especially on the conversion side of it, unless you're doing some type of marketing with us. And the reason why is because we don't want to just make a pretty website just for no reason. We want for it to convert in a way, and a lot of times that comes through understanding the data. So looking at, all right, if we ran a campaign, we did this and that. Oh, okay, the demographic is not really Gen Z, it's really millennial, or it's not really millennial, it's really X or boomer. So then the creative needs to change, all the marketing needs to change. The photography and the shoots you do on the website needs to change with that as well.
Right.
So those aligning really helps solidify what you do as a service.
That's cool. And then what is, looking ahead, okay, so you've reached what everybody who enters the digital marketing space, like this is the path to 7 figures kind of thing. You've reached that. What is the next 5 years? Or if it needs to be shorter, you can shorten it. But what does the next 5 years look like for you and your agency? Is it a scaling play? Is it going deeper in what you're already doing? Like, what does that look like?
I feel the future of marketing is creative. So with the advancements of AI and like audience segmentation, all these different technical things, looking at first-party data, third-party data, a lot of that's probably going to go out the door, and it's going to be kind of with the introduction of like privacy and what Apple's doing, pixel tracking, all these different things. Now we have server events, so it does help, but a lot of that stuff is going to be on these major corporations to kind of figure out, and they're going to automate a lot of that. And I just feel like AI is going to get so intelligent at predictive analytics that it'll be less on the technical side and more so on the creative. So for us, it's mainly focusing on what can we do from a creative standpoint that really just changes the game for us. So for us, it's going to be developing a creative studio. Ideally, in our mind, I want to either buy or rent a warehouse where it's a full-on production studio where we could shoot everything that we need to shoot, top from beginning to end, whether it's a product shoot, photo shoot, mainly it's going to be video shooting, but everything in that sphere, because going in from a creative standpoint is going to be the future, I believe, of marketing, more so than anything else.
And do you feel like, because to me that almost like that it's not a big departure, but that definitely is a potential big shift for what you're currently doing in terms of really honing in on the creative. Um, is that something also that then affects the personnel makeup of Octo 13? Meaning it can't be remote. It's got to be people that are based, here in LA, that type of thing, and it really like brings a lot more in house.
100%. So, like for the creative side, yeah, it for sure will have to be more locally based and stuff like that. And I think where you live actually plays a big role in that.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of like business owners probably make the mistake of like moving for cost of living and not realizing they also change their talent pool. So like they move to a Nashville, they move to a Dallas, they move, and not saying there's not creative people there, but there's nothing like LA. There's nothing like it.
Yeah.
Like even to the point where I had this happen where I'll offer my opinion on a call with a client, their whole team's available and they're chatting, and I'll be like, we should probably be doing this, this, and that. And somebody on the call will be like, well, what makes you the authority? I'm usually a little taken back. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't say anything. I was just like,
you hired me?
Yeah, I was like, well, yeah, I'm thinking in my head, well,
me
you hired
here.
me, but obviously I want to be respectful. And it's like, he's probably asking a genuine question. It just came off kind of weird.
Sure.
And then somebody on the call was like, Michael's from LA. And they were just like, oh, apologies. Okay. And they just continued with the conversation.
That's crazy.
And it's weird, though, that is validity to them, but it also makes sense. Like, if you want to be an actor, where would you move? You wouldn't move to Boise, Idaho, right?
Yeah.
You would move to LA.
Yeah.
Want to be a model, New York, LA. You want to sell yachts, maybe go to Miami.
Yeah.
I wouldn't try the Great Lakes of Michigan, but they have water, but I think the yachts are probably predominantly sold in these coastal areas.
Standpoint, you have every type of person living in LA.
Yes.
So it's like if you have someone that's in Texas or wherever, like they have one type of person, right? Like they're one demographic really across the whole state that you would essentially market to. So if you're trying to, especially a digital product or anything like that that's online, it's not based out of a singular spot or a brick and mortar store, that's just for your community, you'd have to lean on someone that is in a bit of a melting pot as far as like people go, okay, this is what works for everybody, not just, my zip code.
Right. Leadership wise, I think leadership is something I'm always fascinated in because there are so many different styles of successful leadership.
Mm-hmm.
For you, are two questions. One, are there people that you like to emulate leadership wise? And then for yourself, what kind of leadership style are you? Are you a very like type A, we're going this direction kind of thing? Are you much more, I want to field things and kind of be a puppet master kind of thing? Yeah, talk through your leadership style.
I'm definitely like a proponent of great ideas.
Yeah.
So that could come from anywhere. But I also believe in strategy, and that usually comes down to what we call like a testing strategy. So it's not to say that all ideas, there's no such thing as a bad idea. I definitely believe in that because people will present ideas as like, it's not a good idea.
Not even close.
But there's definitely room to test things. And I think having that space to test gives you the freedom, because it's not always about to test to move the needle more. Like let's say it's sales, right? So it's like, okay, testing moves the needle that way. But testing can also strike things out that don't work, so you don't have to question it again. And I think that's a helpful thing as well, where let's say you're running a restaurant and you're like, should we do happy hour at a different time, or say, to get business? You realize, or should we do, if you're a mechanic and you do oil changes, should we do oil changes for a discount? Okay. you try these different things and you realize it might bring in the wrong clientele. Right. And you're like, oh, I don't really like, because now they only want this oil change, or they only come in when we do happy hour. They're not doing any of these things. So you have to get creative in that sense. So even for us, we look at what can we test, and we just kind of create a list, and we just like, we'll test this, test that. What are the results of those tests? Did it move the needle in terms of us understanding data and figuring out the demographic? Yes or no, and then kind of move along from there. So that kind of helps us understand that from a testing strategy.
I like that. Well, I think as we head toward the conclusion of this, I asked this question on our last podcast. It may become like the question that I ask every person, because to me it's, I don't know, it's a very personal thing. What is your definition of excellence?
I guess my definition of excellence would be doing whatever you can to the best of your ability. And also, though, you can't allow your ego to get in the way of you and what you're trying to do for others. And I think a lot of times taking criticism can bother us, maybe men in particular, or maybe it affects both genders or all genders. But it's not letting your ego get in the way and understanding that the journey to success, the journey to success can look different for others. And I believe success is relative in the sense of, for a Jeff Bezos, making $10 million a year is an absolute failure. But for someone making $100K a year is the greatest achievement they ever achieved. And for others, it's just working enough so that they could be with their family and be with their loved ones and stuff like that. And understanding that that looks different for every person. So whether you're building a company, you're building a team, or you're part of something bigger, is being respectful of the people's decisions and understanding not everyone's meant to be CEO, owner, boss, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's a collaborative effort, and everyone can't be CEO. Everyone can't be chief of marketing. Everyone can't be photographer and videographer. Like, you can't just do it all. And being respectful of each person's decisions and the choices that they make makes you a better leader, makes you more empathetic and understanding of people's journeys and their chapter where they're at in their life.
Love it. Do you have any other questions?
I'm good.
Good?
I'm all right.
Well, that's a wrap on another episode of the Statesman podcast. Parra, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Where can people, is it octo13.com?
Yeah, Octo13, so OCTO13.com. You can find us there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on. Thank you also for smoking our new blend.
Yes.
And yeah, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all the things. And we will see you for another episode.